The bright lights of Station Nova 7 hurt Tom's eyes as he walked through its pristine white corridors. Everything here was too clean, too smooth, and far too gentle for his taste. But that was exactly why he had chosen this place for his medical exchange program. The Galactic Medical Academy needed a fresh perspective, even if they didn't know it yet. Tom adjusted his environment suit's settings again. The station's gravity was set to the galactic standard, which felt like floating to him. The air was thinner too, optimized for the majority of spacefaring species. He had spent 3 months training just to walk normally in these conditions. The Academy's dean, a tall being with iridescent scales, waited at the entrance of the medical wing. The dean's inner eyelids blinked rapidly as Tom approached, a sign of nervousness that Tom had learned to recognize during his stenobiology studies. "Welcome to our facility, Assistant Reed," the dean said through the translator. "We are honored to have a human join our teaching staff." The slight pause didn't go unnoticed. Tom smiled, keeping his lips closed to avoid showing his teeth. "Thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to sharing Earth's medical knowledge with your students." The dean led him through the teaching halls. Students of various species moved aside, their bodies displaying a range of stress signals. A group of floating gas-filled beings changed color from blue to green. A cluster of insectoid students clicked their mandibles rapidly. Even the crystalline beings seemed to vibrate at a higher frequency. "These will be your students," the dean explained, gesturing to a class of 20 diverse beings. "They are studying emergency medical response. We understand humans have unique approaches to this field." Tom noticed the medical dummies they used for practice. They were made of materials so soft they seemed to dissolve at the slightest touch. The emergency tools looked more like artists' brushes than medical instruments. "Perhaps you would like to observe our current protocols first," the dean suggested, "to understand our standard procedures." Tom watched as a student demonstrated their emergency response to a simulated heart failure. The movements were so slow and gentle that Tom had to stop himself from stepping in. The patient would have died 3 times over on Earth. "Very interesting," Tom said diplomatically, "though I notice the response time is quite different from Earth standards." The dean's scales shifted color slightly. "Yes, we believe in maintaining the patient's comfort during all procedures. Aggressive treatment could cause additional trauma." Tom thought about Earth's emergency rooms, about chest compressions that broke ribs to save lives, about emergency tracheotomies performed with pocket knives. He thought about the concept of acceptable damage during life-saving procedures. These aliens were about to learn some very shocking lessons about human medical practices. "I've prepared some materials about Earth's emergency protocols," Tom said. "Would you like to review them before I present them to the class?" The dean took the data pad. As those iridescent eyes scanned the information, their color drained to a pale white. This can't be correct. These procedures would cause severe tissue damage." "Sometimes you have to hurt to heal," Tom said quietly. "That's the first lesson my students will need to learn." The dean looked at him with all 4 eyes wide open. In that moment, Tom knew that his time at the academy would change more than just medical protocols. It would challenge everything these beings thought they knew about the relationship between damage and healing, between violence and care. He was going to teach them how to save lives, the human way, whether they were ready for it or not. The biochemistry lab hummed with the soft whir of air filters and quiet murmurs of students. Tom stood at the back, watching the class work with common medical compounds. His presence still made some students nervous, but after 2 weeks, they had stopped changing colors every time he moved. The blue-crested Luminian student called Swift worked 3 tables away, carefully measuring drops of a standard disinfectant. Tom had noticed that Swift was one of the few students who looked at him with curiosity instead of fear. That's why he kept an eye on them. And that's why he noticed first when something went wrong. Swift's feathers suddenly puffed out, their normally smooth blue crest turning a sickly gray. The student's breathing chamber began to flash with warning lights, the Luminian equivalent of gasping for air. Anaphylactic shock. Tom shouted, already moving. The professor, a tall reed-like being, swayed in distress. "We must call the medical team and wait for," the professor began. Tom was already at Swift's side. "No time. Their breathing chamber is failing." He pulled his emergency kit from his belt, the one the dean had called unnecessarily aggressive. "Everyone back up." The other students scattered as Tom pulled out an auto-injector designed for Luminian physiology. Earth's medical exchange program had insisted he learn to modify human emergency responses for different species. "This will hurt," Tom warned Swift, whose eye membranes were now turning cloudy. "But it will save your life." He jabbed the injector into the breathing chamber's emergency port with enough force to make the watching students gasp. Swift's body jerked as the medication hit their system. Tom quickly began setting up an emergency breathing apparatus, his movements fast and decisive. To the aliens, he must have looked like he was attacking rather than helping. "Stop him," someone shouted. "He's damaging the student." The professor drifted forward uncertainly. "Assistant Reed, our protocols require." "Your protocols would let them die." Tom snapped, not looking up from his work. "Swift, if you can understand me, blink once. A single blink." "Good. The medication will feel hot. Your feathers will hurt. This is normal. Keep breathing." The emergency breathing apparatus clicked into place. Swift's feathers slowly began to smooth out, their color returning to a pale but definite blue. The warning lights on their breathing chamber dimmed. The room was silent except for the soft hiss of the breathing apparatus. Tom checked Swift's vital signs with his scanner, nodding in satisfaction. Only then did he look up at the crowd of shocked faces. "That," he said calmly, "is how humans handle anaphylactic shock. The patient lives, even if it looks scary." He turned to Swift. "You'll need to visit the medical bay for observation, but you'll be fine." Swift's translator crackled. "Thank you. It hurt, but I could feel myself dying before." "The hurt is better." The professor's reeds rustled in agitation. "This will need to be reported. The force used, the speed of intervention, it's not our way." "No," Tom agreed, packing up his kit. "It's the human way. And it works." He helped Swift stand, noting how the other students watched with a mix of fear and something new, respect. As he guided Swift to the medical bay, Tom heard the whispers behind him. The story would spread through the station, how the human had saved a life using methods that looked like violence but brought healing. It wasn't the gentle way they were used to, but they couldn't deny the results. The first crack had appeared in their perception of proper medical care. Tom knew it wouldn't be the last. The inquiry boardroom felt colder than usual station spaces. 5 senior faculty members sat behind a curved desk, their varied anatomies all displaying signs of discomfort. Tom stood before them, back straight, environment suit freshly cleaned. The recording of his emergency intervention played on the wall behind him. "Assistant Reed," the dean spoke first, scales shifting through worried colors. "We've reviewed the incident. The student Swift is recovering well. Too well, some might say. Our standard recovery time for such reactions is 3 station cycles. They recovered in 1. That's the point of rapid intervention," Tom said. "The faster you act, the better the outcome." A crystalline professor chimed in, their facets reflecting light in patterns of distress. "But the force used. The recording shows you practically attacked the breathing chamber with that injector." "The injector needs sufficient force to deliver medication through the chamber's emergency port. It's designed that way." "Designed for violence," a gaseous faculty member pulsed. "We've analyzed your emergency kit. Every tool is made for forceful use. Even your scanner could crack shells if misused." Tom took a deep breath of his suit's Earth-normal air. "Members of the board, I understand your concerns, but medicine isn't always gentle. Sometimes saving a life requires actions that look violent to outside observers. That's what disturbs us," the dean said. "Your willingness to cause harm in the name of healing. Several students reported nightmares after witnessing your intervention." And Swift, did they report nightmares? The board shifted uncomfortably. The dean's scales flickered. Swift has requested to learn your methods, as have several other students. That's even more concerning. Tom hadn't expected that. He kept his expression neutral, but inside he felt a spark of hope. They understand something you're missing. In an emergency, the enemy isn't pain, it's time. Every second spent being gentle could mean death. A professor made of living crystal harmonized in disagreement. Our methods have served us for generations. They're proven safe. Safe for those strong enough to survive the waiting. Tom countered. How many patients have you lost because treatment was too slow? How many families have heard, we did everything we could when you actually didn't? The words hit hard. Tom saw the dean's scales shift to the deep blue of memory and grief. The gaseous professor condensed slightly, their species equivalent of a flinch. Your methods are effective, the dean finally admitted. But they're traumatic to witness. They go against everything our students are taught about medical care. Then teach them something new, Tom said. Let them learn that sometimes healing doesn't look healing. Let them understand that a moment of force can prevent hours of suffering. He gestured to the recording. Swift is alive because human medicine values survival over comfort. Isn't that worth learning? The board deliberated in their various native languages, a cascade of colors, lights, and sounds. Tom waited, knowing this moment would determine not just his future at the academy, but the future of emergency care for countless species. Finally, the dean turned to him. You may continue teaching, but we have conditions. Tom watched as Swift pressed down on the practice dummy's chest plate. The compression barely registered on the monitoring system. Around them, 5 other students from different species observed with intense focus. More force, Tom said. Remember, in a real emergency, you're trying to manually pump the circulatory system. But the tissue damage, Swift's feathers ruffled in distress, will heal. Dead patients don't heal at all. Tom stepped forward. Watch again. He demonstrated the chest compression technique, using the full force necessary for most carbon-based life forms. The dummy's damage indicators flashed red, making several students flinch. This much force breaks support structures, Swift said, their translator struggling with the concept of ribs. Yes, and that's acceptable because the alternative is death. Tom stepped back. Try again. Swift hesitated, then pressed down hard. The dummy's indicators shifted from green to yellow. Better, but not enough. Harder, Tom encouraged. Think about how fast you were dying in the lab. Think about how the violent treatment saved you. Swift's feathers flattened in determination. This time, when they pressed, the dummy's indicators flashed red. A perfect compression. That's it, Tom grinned. That's how you save a life. The crystalline student, Prism, chimed nervously. My structure could shatter applying such force. Then we adapt the technique. Tom pulled out a different dummy. Your crystalline form can channel focused pressure points instead. The goal is the same, maintain circulation until help arrives. For hours, they practiced. Each species had to learn modified versions of human emergency techniques. The gas form student learned to create pressure differentials. The insectoid learned to use their multiple limbs for simultaneous interventions. Even the energy being figured out how to safely discharge power to restart failing organs. Remember, Tom said as they finished, these techniques look brutal because they are. We're fighting death itself. It's not supposed to be gentle. Like battling entropy, the energy being hummed. Sometimes destruction leads to preservation. Swift nodded, their feathers shimmering with new confidence. The board was wrong about human methods. They're not violent. They're decisive. Tell that to the next committee meeting, Tom replied. They're still debating whether to allow these lessons to continue. We'll tell them, Prism chimed. We'll show them. Our species may be physically weaker than humans, but we can learn to be just as determined. As his students packed up their practice gear, Tom noticed other academy students watching from the doorway. News had spread about these secret human emergency response lessons. More students were becoming curious, questioning the old ways. Change was coming to the academy, one broken practice dummy at a time. The station's emergency sirens pierced the quiet of the medical training room. Tom's students immediately stopped their practice session, their various species showing universal signs of alarm. Engineering section, multiple casualties, the station AI announced. Standard medical response teams en route. Tom looked at his small group of trained students. They had spent weeks practicing emergency responses, learning to overcome their cultural aversion to rapid intervention. Now it was time to put that training to use. "We're going," he said, already grabbing his emergency kit. "This is what we trained for." The engineering section was chaos. A coolant pipe had ruptured, spraying toxic material across 3 levels. The standard medical team stood at the safe distance required by protocol, waiting for decontamination procedures to complete. Tom assessed the scene. 3 engineers lay injured inside the contamination zone. The closest one, a crystalline being, had several fractured facets. Beyond them, a gaseous engineer was rapidly losing cohesion. The third, an insectoid, wasn't moving at all. They must wait for proper safety clearance. A medical officer protested as Tom's group approached. "The contamination. We'll kill them before your clearance comes," Tom interrupted. "Swift, Prism, get the crystalline patient. Remember your compression modifications. Starbright, stabilize the gaseous form. I'll take the insectoid." His students moved with purpose, wearing the protective gear they'd insisted on keeping with their emergency kits. Another aggressive human practice that was about to pay off. Swift and Prism reached the crystalline engineer. Their newly learned techniques, adapted for crystalline physiologies, began to stabilize the fracturing being. Starbright, the energy student, used controlled power discharges to maintain the gaseous engineer's cohesion. Tom reached the insectoid engineer just as their life signs began to fade. The standard medical team watched in horror as he employed human emergency techniques modified for insectoid anatomy. His movements were fast, decisive, and to their eyes, terrifyingly forceful. "What are you doing?" the medical officer cried. "Those methods will cause additional trauma." "Those methods are saving lives," Swift called back, their feathers rigid with concentration as they worked. "Watch and learn." Minutes passed like hours. The decontamination team finally arrived to find 3 patients stabilized and ready for transport. The standard medical team stood in shocked silence, their gentle tools still unused. "Impossible," the medical officer whispered. "The trauma alone should have." "Should have what?" Tom asked, helping secure the insectoid engineer for transport. "Should have been fatal. More fatal than doing nothing. Sometimes the gentlest solution is the most dangerous one." The station's medical director arrived as they were finishing up. They looked from the saved engineers to Tom's team, their sensory organs processing the scene. "It seems," they said slowly, "that we need to reevaluate our emergency protocols." The Academy's main conference room buzzed with tension as the footage played. Every faculty member watched the emergency response in the engineering section, their various biological signs showing a mix of horror and fascination. Tom stood quietly at the back, his students beside him. The medical director paused the recording. 3 patients, all critically injured. Standard response time would have been 47 minutes for proper decontamination and safety protocols. Assistant Reed's team achieved stabilization in 8 minutes. "With significant tissue damage," a traditional instructor noted. "With significant survival rates," the director countered. "All 3 patients have already returned to light duty. Under our protocols, they would still be in critical care. If they had survived at all." The dean's scales shifted through thoughtful colors. "The numbers are compelling. In the 3 months since Assistant Reed began teaching his methods, emergency survival rates have increased by 62%. But the violence of it," the crystalline professor chimed, "the cultural impact, is less important than living patients," Swift interrupted, stepping forward. Their feathers were proudly erect. I was dying of anaphylactic shock. Traditional protocols would have let me die gently. Human protocols saved me forcefully. Which outcome matters more? The room erupted in discussion. Species-specific medical traditions spanning generations were being challenged by undeniable results. Tom watched as his students joined the debate, each speaking about their experiences learning human emergency response. The force used is precise, Prism explained, their facets glittering. It is not random violence, but calculated intervention. Like cutting a crystal along its cleavage planes, it appears brutal, but achieves the desired result with minimum necessary damage. The medical director raised their appendages for silence. We've analyzed every case where human protocols were used. The data is clear. Higher survival rates, faster recovery times, better long-term outcomes. We cannot ignore these results because the methods make us uncomfortable. What do you propose? The dean asked. Integration. Full adoption of human emergency response protocols, adapted for each species. Assistant Reed students have already proven it's possible. We need to expand the program. Tom finally spoke up. My students aren't just learning techniques. They're learning to overcome their instinctive reactions, to understand that sometimes helping looks like harm. That's the harder lesson. Then we will learn it, the dean said, their scales settling into the color of decision. The academy will establish a new department, Rapid Emergency Response. Assistant Reed, we're promoting you to full professor. Your first task is to develop a comprehensive curriculum. The traditional instructor's appendages waved in distress. Our gentle methods will still have their place, Tom assured them, but not in emergencies, not when seconds count and lives hang in the balance. Then we must be willing to act decisively, even if it looks violent to outside eyes. The academy would never be the same. And that, Tom knew, was exactly what the galaxy's emergency medicine needed. 1 year later, Tom watched through the observation window as Swift demonstrated emergency response techniques to a new class. The practice room was full, with students from 30 different species learning human-inspired medical protocols. Compression force must be sufficient to maintain circulation, Swift explained, their feathers steady as they performed the once shocking procedure. Yes, it will cause tissue damage. Yes, it will be uncomfortable, but dead patients don't recover from anything. The students nodded, taking notes. None showed the horror that such techniques had once inspired. The academy's culture had shifted dramatically in the past year, spreading ripples throughout galactic medicine. Professor Reed, a crystalline being approached, their facets arranged in a pattern Tom now recognized as eager professionalism. The Galactic Medical Council is ready for your presentation. Tom followed them to the conference room, where representatives from 200 medical institutions waited. The council had gathered to evaluate the Academy's revolutionary new approach to emergency care. Honored council members, Tom began, 1 year ago, this academy became the first institution to fully integrate human emergency response protocols. Today, I'll show you the results. The data scrolled across the displays. Emergency survival rates up 78%. Recovery times reduced by half. Long-term complications down 30%. The numbers told a story that no cultural tradition could ignore. But more important than the numbers are the changes in medical philosophy. Tom continued, our students now understand that gentle methods have their place, but emergencies require decisive action. They've learned that causing minor trauma to prevent death isn't violence. It's the highest form of care. From the back of the room, the dean's scales glowed with pride. Their institution had gone from questioning human methods to championing them across the galaxy. Every graduate now carried the title Rapid Response Certified, a designation that had become highly sought after. We're not just teaching techniques, Tom explained. We're teaching a mindset. The willingness to act quickly, to accept temporary damage in service of saving lives. This is the human contribution to galactic medicine. After the presentation, Tom returned to the practice room. Swift was still teaching, demonstrating to a young gaseous being how to properly secure an emergency breathing apparatus. "Remember," Swift said, using words that had once been Tom's, "in an emergency, your enemy is time. Every second spent being gentle could mean death. We must be willing to act decisively." The student performed the procedure perfectly, their gaseous form showing no hesitation despite the forceful movements required. Tom smiled. The future of emergency medicine stood before him. Beings of all species, learning to save lives the human way. The term Deathworlder medicine was now a mark of excellence, a standard that medical facilities across the galaxy strived to achieve. He thought back to his first day at the academy, when his methods had inspired fear and doubt. Now those same methods were saving lives in every corner of known space. Sometimes the best way to change a culture was to prove, one patient at a time, that the shocking way could be the right way. The galaxy had learned that lesson well.